Good afternoon, everyone. We have a lot to delve into here. So let me frame this up again. Throughout the day, we have really reinforced this notion of centering purpose at the core of our business. This is table stakes, right? We've heard that we need to bring our stakeholders, our employees, our customers to the table. Brands need to be people first, right? So now, let's talk about business transformation to affect change. And there are lots of factors involved in really driving this agenda forward. Given that companies are on this expedition, I love this term, right? We're no longer on a journey. It's an expedition. We might fall off a cliff. We might get ambushed. So what are some of these challenges, right? Particularly in how we manage the scope of our data for this business transformation. How do we reframe the messaging of ESG so it doesn't feel as though it's, and get the C-suite involved? And then finally, how do we really truly advance embedding sustainability into this business strategy so that there aren't roles for the chief sustainability officer? No offense to the chief sustainability officers in this room. It's baked into every single business function. No company wants to be left behind. The stakes are real. Vivek, we'll start off with you. So with that, let's frame the conversation. There's a lot of fear about the sustainability expedition. What is at the heart of solving this issue?
So I'm glad you called it the expedition. I'm also delighted and honored to be on stage with our partners, Accenture, Capgemini, and a customer as well, the NHL. It is an expedition. It's a journey, obviously, which is fraught with lots of different challenges. One of the challenges, obviously, if you take one of the issues, is about ambition setting. So if you just take the climate example, a lot of companies that we talk to have expressed their ambitions in terms of net zero objectives. The conversation, however, has moved from the why of sustainability into the how of sustainability. And that's where some of the deepest challenges are. So if you're an organization that has put forward a net zero ambition on climate or waste reduction, for instance, or equality and social issues, that's great. Some of these targets are near, some of them are really far. The question is, how do you execute to those targets? And from our perspective, what we see is, and it was discussed in many of the panels earlier today as well, is that in essence, this is becoming a data challenge. It's a data management challenge where we believe that technology can be one of the enablers in terms of helping overcome those issues. So the conversation has moved from the why into the how. There's a fierce sense of urgency. We don't have 100 years to solve this challenge, so we have just a few years. And I think the other part of it is that companies are being pressed through regulations and other forces, not just from consumers, but companies are being pressed by regulations from all over the world in terms of being able to provide auditable, granular information that is regulated to the same degree as that of financials. So that's the real issue that most of the customers that we talk to are facing today.
So great. So we're seeing this whole shift now about needing to have this data authentic, but ESG is becoming as important as financial disclosures. Saul, to you. Let's talk about some of those ESG challenges. Let's talk about what are the reporting mechanisms within ESG. What are some of those biggest challenges around ESG, and how do you frame it as a company's blind spot? These are blind spots within our organizations that are really trying to advance this. So how do you think about those challenges?
I think, thank you for the question, and it's a delight, and I'm humbled and privileged to be here and to be here representing Capgemini. I think the biggest challenge with respect to ESG, it just lost its meaning. I think a lot of us have been following ESG for years. I've been doing this work for 32 years. I was a toddler when I first started. And frankly, I think the more discussion, analysis, research that has been done on ESG, the less it has become meaningful to industry. And I think there's certainly been a lot of recent research and a study on that very topic. So what we're doing at Capgemini is to try to do a bit of a soft reboot, if you will, on what ESG fundamentally means. Some of you may be familiar with a book that recently came out, authored by the ex-CEO of Unilever, Paul Pullman and Andrew Winston, both stalwart figures in the topic of sustainability, and they begin to talk about the next generation of ESG. Sort of in the interest of doing this soft reboot, perhaps we should begin thinking about reparative, regenerative, nature-based business models. One of the examples they use in the book is one, it's a blunt example, but I'll use it, is if you're a serial killer, it's not good enough to decide that instead of killing 17 people one year, you're going to kill 3 the next. So doing less bad is not good enough. And so we need to begin to think about how do we repair the damage that we've done already. And certainly at Capgemini, we're working with our clients or partners to do exactly that. And the ESG discussion, of course, is front and center. How do you measure a business that has committed itself to a regenerative, reparative business framework, as was the case, for example, with Unilever, and as I suspect is the case with some of you? So I think it's a question of definition, and the challenge for all of us in this community is to be very precise about what a sort of a reparative, regenerative model looks like.
So you talk about regenerative business models, you're talking about blowing up ESG. We need to reframe how we think about how we educate businesses around this. So Wes, what shift have you seen in your clients as they focus on embedding this sustainability into their transformative business models, right? Because do you literally have to blow it up? Do you literally have to explain a brand new paradigm for thinking? And how do you get their buy-in?
Yeah, a great question, and I think to build on what's been said, of course, we all know the complexity, the uncharted waters that we've been in over the last couple of years, and that organizations are facing huge disruptions in their supply chain and how their organizations are run. And really, also individuals are thinking about how they live, work, and conduct their day-to-day lives differently. So we are in this whole new territory that does require transformational thinking and transformational doing. And I think on a positive side, right, there is so much that is scary and overwhelming, but on the positive side, what I'm seeing over the last couple of years is sustainability and ESG, although, again, it comes with complexity, is a move towards prioritization really at the highest level, as organizations are starting to understand and starting to implement changes that really tie together resilience, which is sort of the theme of the day, right, especially as we head into difficult economic times, and sustainability. Those two things should be synonymous, and I think it's quite a lot to unpick how they fit together, what are some of the trade-offs, what are some of the advantages, but leading organizations really are starting to put that together and put the mechanisms in place to deliver that, speaking of data and sort of process and system transformation, speaking of how do you think about ESG in a holistic way, and moving their programs and initiatives in sustainability into something more holistic and transformational that touches the whole value chain, right? Sustainability just isn't one thing. It is a transformation topic, and that holistic view across the value chain, which includes new targets, new ambitions, new ways of working with employees, new partnerships, new types of innovations and disruptions. All of these things need to be thought about because we aren't just incremental anymore. We're truly talking about system shifts. And system shifts require organizations to think much more broadly than they have before and much more creatively, because this is moving from this current system that we're in, which clearly is not working from an ESG perspective. We have to make some big changes, and I think those foundations are starting to be in place. Long way to go, but some positive signs, I would say.
System changes. So let's pick up on that theme really quickly, because I think that when we think of revamping the system or understanding all of our impacts, we need to think about structural and broad ways of thinking through this transformation. Let me explain it. Data is key to this transformation. Vivek, this is to you. How do we go beyond the current ESG reporting and shape a framework that is holistic, maybe with Scope 3 emissions being at the center of this? Because to your point, Wes, to your point, it is about thinking about new ways of how do we define supply chain risk, being resilient within those, when we don't even have a lot of the insights for Scope 3, for things like Scope 3 emissions, right? So how do we think about it? How is SAP thinking about that?
Yeah, and I'd just maybe love to continue this discussion on ESG, because in some circles, obviously, as you know, ESG is a four-letter word, right? I think if you look at the history of ESG, most of the history of ESG lies in, for the most part, it used to be in the office of the CSR organization, right? But now when we look at ESG, where is the discussion on ESG happening? It's happening in the finance department. It's happening in procurement. It's happening in manufacturing. It's happening on the consumer-facing aspects of the business. So really the shift has happened from, to your point, Wes, it's moved from small pockets of the organization where you could offer up a ESG report from a CSR perspective and add it to your financials. The big shift now is that that reporting has to be integrated as part of your financials. It's not something that's separate, but it's embedded into your financials. And that brings every function in your organization into play, which is why we cannot solve these problems with just linear thinking. You have to have exponential thinking, system-wide thinking. And this is where, if you look at a problem like Scope 3, for instance, I think we heard from some of the panelists earlier today, Scope 1 and 2, in the context of Scope 3, are relatively easy problems to solve. But what if I was a brand that said, you know, I do want to be able to associate all of the emissions that have touched this particular product at the SKU unit level? That's a hard thing to do. So if somebody said, you know what, your salary tomorrow is not this exact number, but we'll pay you something between 100 and 300K. Would you accept that? You probably would not, right? You would want to know exactly what the data is. That's where data comes in. And so what we are able to work with our partners on is actually solving or helping solve or address some of those issues. They're not going to be solved overnight. This is a really complicated challenge. But you're seeing brands actually taking a real leap forward in terms of addressing many of these issues. So there's a small set of companies that are investing and making this happen, and we'll see sort of the network effect kick in, and we'll see, you know, more and more companies across multiple industries getting into the play.
And so are you seeing that? Are you seeing this sea shift already, this sea change already happening? And are you seeing that, or how do you see that partnerships are essential to accelerating that transformation?
Yeah. No, we absolutely are seeing it. We're interacting, as I suspect our colleagues at Accenture and other firms, with C-suite clients all the time. And I think Vivek makes a very good point. You know, this cannot any longer be a separate issue. ESG, in many ways, has suffered from a separateness, if you will, from other issues that C-suite clients, CXOs, whether CFO, COO, CEO, have been facing. And it has to be a fundamental part of how they make every single decision, whether it's a hiring decision, whether it's a decision to move to the cloud, whether it's a promotion decisions, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so it has to be embedded in everything that they do. And I think, again, the point about systems change is exactly right. We are in a dire, I think the term that's been used is a horror story. And you know, the example that I use, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, the example that I use is we all just came out of a 2-year horror story, a 2-year pandemic. And every decision we made as individuals, as executives, was a risk return decision. It was a life and death decision, very realistically. The surface that we touched, or walking across the street to see our neighbors or going to see our grandparents, was a life and death decision. Climate change is every bit as much a life and death decision. It is every bit as much a risk return decision. We had a conversation about this with several of us over lunch. So the question becomes, how do you inject that level of immediacy to that topic? I mean, the Earth is using resources, or I should say we as human beings are using resources every year that takes the Earth to generate over 2 years, which means we're in a net deficit situation every year. So time is of the essence. We at Capgemini believe that this is a transcendent issue, not a transaction or a transitory issue. And so, yes, it needs to be made part of every single discussion that's being had at the C-suite. And we are seeing it. So that's encouraging.
Wes, how do we communicate that level of urgency then? In other words, what are the things that are motivating our executives or the C-suite so that they can understand what the implications and what's at stake here?
I think one of the biggest things that's motivating executives and boards into starting to really prioritize this as a top level agenda is almost the risk of doing nothing is no longer an option. The risk of being incremental is no longer an option. And if you can't do either of those things, well, you have to make bolder decisions, or I think organizations are starting to realize they will lose competitiveness, right? They will lose brand value. They will lose opportunities for revenue or to reduce costs, amongst a whole host of other things. So I think the risk of inaction is greater than maybe anything else. And what we're seeing is, I talked about that tie between sustainability and resilience starting to really be prioritized, but also starting to see it as a transformation agenda similar to what we're seeing with technology, and really coupling technology and digital together with sustainability. Those are the sort of roots of the future to this big systems change, and I think that's really, really critical. And I also think there's personal motivators in there. No leader, you said we don't want to do less bad anymore, or no leader wants to be left with thinking about just doing the less bad. They want to be thought about as the first leader to do more good. And I think I've heard that message a lot from executives is they have that motivation to drive that change, and it can be really significant, and that can enable the trickle down across the organization. So it is about competitiveness. It is about the combination of digital technology and sustainability. And ultimately, it's about us all as individuals and therefore as leaders and taking that responsibility for action. And I think we will start to see that proliferate rapidly, or we all hope.
We're reaching the lightning round, but before I ask about one key takeaway, Vivek, can you give an example of how SAP is really embedding technology and innovation, right? Sustainability equals innovation, I like to say. Give one example of how that's working in your customers.
Yeah, sure. So consider the fact that almost 88% of the world's supply chains are touching an SAP system today, whether it's procurement or supply chain or even finance. Well, the good news is that the data that is required for this type of transformation is actually available or can be accessed through the existing tools that you have without disruption. That's the key part. You don't have to do something really dramatically or drastically new. So the data is out there, it can be accessed. And the tools that we provide, along with Accenture, Capgemini, are tools that help you either create responsible design, you can increase circularity within your supply chain, or we can help you in terms of reporting, for instance, towards your ESG performance. So all of that data can be basically moved from averages or estimates. Sometimes a lot of the data is sitting in spreadsheets. You don't want those averages or estimates. But we can take data from live systems and move you away from averages into actual data so that you can report and you can make transformation efforts happen with real data, live data, instead of working with estimates. And so whether it's reporting, whether it's changing the nature of your supply chain, whether it's changing the way that you procure things, that's where we see both the data as well as the business process aspect working for the benefit of our customers.
And so, shameless plug, look out tomorrow for a big announcement between SAP and the NHL on exactly what he just said, but I won't say anything more. Lightning round. Key takeaways.
Yeah. Key takeaway, look, if not us, who? I mean, if not us in this room, who is going to do it? It's up to industry. It's up to us to decide whether we're going to compete or collaborate. And it's time to collaborate in ways that we've never collaborated before. And I couldn't agree more with Vivek. Data is not the new gold. Data is the new silk. And it's up to us to decide how we turn that data into insights, into value that will, at some point, we all believe, we all know, will create a sustainable future for us. So yes, the solution is in this room, and if not us, then who?
Yeah, I think to add on that, the solutions are there. They're either coming or they're available. It's about bringing the right pieces together, thinking about data, thinking about technology, thinking about innovation. And as I said earlier, it's about being creative, to think and do in new ways. And we have to change that narrative and make this an exciting opportunity to build a new world. And if we can do that together in partnerships and in sort of new ways of collaborating, there's really power to make the change. So we're halfway to the SDGs, and we're behind, so we need to really step up and take bigger, bolder moves, take more risk for greater rewards and outcomes.
Any last comments?
I just leave you with one thought, that all of this talk of data and technology is fantastic. I love it. At the end of the day, this is all about people. What are we doing all this for? And it's for the billions of people that many of our customers touch on a daily basis, and that's what we're in it for them, and we're going to do it together.
Excellent way to wrap it up. Hope this was insightful. Thank you